Okay, I think we're just about ready to begin our presentation today. My name is Mark. I am here with my colleagues Sharon, Crystal, Ann, and Deb. They're going to be doing most of the heavy lifting today as they take you through our presentation on pathways to adult services. If at any point during the presentation today you have questions, you can click the Q&A button to type those in and submit them. And periodically throughout the webinar, we're going to pause and try to answer those questions as best we can. I think that's all we have. Oh, the other thing I need to let you all know, folks, is that we are recording this webinar and it is being streamed live to the RIPIN YouTube channel. You'll be able to see a recording of the webinar afterward. And after, we will also email you links to handouts, resources, all the slides from today's presentation, stuff you can download and reference. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Ann, who's going to get us started today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today's workshop was created to offer a general overview of care and support for individuals who are leaving school, entering adulthood, and who might be eligible for supports and services through our Division of Developmental Disabilities. What we hope to help you do today is explore the options that will help guide your decision-making in determining how you might direct supports and services for your child or for your family member that are necessary in creating a meaningful life. So, what is the Division of Developmental Disabilities? I'm going to refer to it as DDD from here on so that we don't take up more than our hour's worth. DDD falls under the umbrella of the Department of Behavioral Health Care, Developmental Disabilities, and Hospitals. Again, another mouthful. So from here on in, I will refer to it as BHDDH for short, and you may recognize that. So this division has been responsible for the funding and oversight of a system of services and supports for adults with disabilities in Rhode Island. When services begin, what they might look like or might include is supported employment, integrated day activities, community supports, respite, and residential services. Now, transition, you may have heard that word before. While we typically talk about transition beginning at age 14 in Rhode Island, as it pertains to this system and any application and services, we begin that process around 17, a little bit before. But I should say, you will likely and should likely hear a little bit more about it as early as 14 and possibly even younger. The younger, the better. So next, these are the steps. So this workshop will give you that kind of overview of the whole process. And these are the steps in the process. I won't read them to you, but as you can see, there's quite a few steps. We're going to walk you through those steps today. And these wonderful colleagues of mine are very knowledgeable and will kind of break the steps down to what we find understandable for ourselves, for parents everywhere. So what I would like to say is we're going to take many breaks throughout this workshop. We really encourage you to submit some questions to us. We'll stop occasionally, address any questions that have come through. So please throw them at us. Okay, and I guess that's it. I'm going to hand it over to Crystal.
Hi, my name is Crystal, as she said. And first we're going to talk to how you can apply for these services. So the application can be found on the BHDDH website, which is www.bhddh.ri.gov. The application can be completed online and it can be printed and submitted along with your supporting documentation and mailed to BHDDH. However, at this time, you cannot apply online for those services. So some of that documentation, we just want you to know that BHDDH does not gather or obtain records for you. It is up to the family or the individual applying for the services to gather all that necessary documentation. So some of that supporting documentation that you're going to need, one of the most important is the official diagnosis you want to get all of your child's most recent diagnosis by a qualified medical professional. You also want to work with your school and get any copies of your evaluations or testing, especially anything that relates to intelligence or IQ or cognitive testing. Another good record to try to get, if you have any, is vocational records. So that might be if your child has worked with the Office of Rehabilitation Services, or ORS, or if your child's done any work trials or employment services with school, those records would be important as well. And then you also want to include any really important medical history as it dates to your child's disability. And then if there is any psychiatric records or hospitalizations, you would want to include those records as well. And lastly, another important thing to think about is if your child works with any other agencies like PT or OT, CNA, PASS, or CEDAR, you can include some information or documentation from those agencies as well. So basically, who can apply? Anybody that an individual that's looking for adult services can apply. The applicant's family or legal guardian can apply. And also lastly, DCYF can apply for an individual. So when to apply? As we stated earlier, you want to start thinking about it at 17. An individual can actually apply for DD services and be found eligible as early as 60 days before their 17th birthday. Most youth that are found eligible for DD services will stay in school till 22, but not all do. So the sooner you can start that process, the better. And DCYF youth are likely to transition to services within DD should apply at least 2 years prior to exiting DCYF services. I'm going to take a break and ask Mark if there's any questions at this point.
Yes, Crystal, we do. We have one question. I'm ready to apply. She writes, I've got most material I need, but I don't have every single school record for him. Is an IEP and some past evals from the school enough?
So I definitely think the most recent IEP will definitely be useful to include with that supporting documentation. And then you also want to include evaluations or testing that's within the past 3 to 5 years. That'll be the most relevant to where your child is right now. So if you have those evaluations and testing from school that's within the past 3 to 5 years, that would be important to include with the IEP to kind of reflect where your child's at now and what they're going to need for adult services.
Okay, very good. That was the only question so far, but it looks like Deb wants to.
Can I just add, I think that Crystal hit it on the head. This is probably the most time-consuming part of getting ready. You know, parents should understand that this is, and this doesn't have to be wait till the, you know, you're at the door of getting ready to apply. So if there's anybody in the audience today who's got younger kids, you know, that they're not quite ready at that door, think about those other agencies like CEDAR or whatnot that you've already been submitting current information. You know, they may not need everything back to early intervention. We don't need a whole school record, but as you're going along, make 2 copies of everything if you can, because like Crystal was saying, you can't do it online right now. So it's still old school. So keep two copies of everything that's going to be current, because that's going to make your life easier when you're finally ready to mail that in.
I'd like to also add too that evaluations that include those diagnoses, those medical diagnoses are also most crucial. And so, and I think something I should have mentioned at the beginning of this workshop is we're kind of going through the process, but we also have another webinar on our website that is a little more specific to the actual walkthrough of the application and the documentation that's really necessary. So if we don't touch on all of those specifics, that webinar definitely does.
Okay, great. Another question. Questioner writes, I just want to make sure the application process to which you are referring is relevant to older adults who have never been in the DD system, not just those transitioning from childhood to adulthood.
I don't know which one of you want to take this. I mean, Annie, help me with this. I'm thinking, you know, you're talking about someone with a developmental disability, and we talked about that a little bit more at our Tuesday night session, but that's someone who's either had a lifelong developmental disability, either from birth or before the age 22.
22.
So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily something that has come later in life. So when you think about documentation, talking about an older adult, you're going to be looking for documentation probably that can show that that existed at a much younger age. Am I correct on that?
Exactly.
Okay.
And there are definitely you know, older adults who have never accessed these services for any number of reasons. And so that there's nothing necessarily that says they have to do it by age 17. But again, like Deb said, the important part would be that that it did manifest itself and was diagnosed before the age of 22, and that there's that documentation. And then we can move forward. We can support many families at different stages of life, so for different reasons.
Okay. Are these services, the next question we have is, are these services applicable for adults transitioning to college or more for people with more profound disabilities?
This workshop is for students that are probably going to need lifelong support. So think about, how much support does the student need in their daily life functions? Do they need help or frequent supervision to get ready in the morning? Do they have access to the community? There's other workshops that we also offer that kind of talk about supports, getting disability supports on the college campus. I think that's another one of our recorded webinars that we have.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, is there are people with developmental disabilities getting supports through the system that go to college. The bigger question is those lifelong needs. You know, is this a child or a young adult who, first of all, they have to have Medicaid, right off the bat. For the most part, they've got to be at Medicaid eligible. And usually that comes with someone who's also been found eligible for Social Security. Again, the workshop that we're not trying to push anyone away. The workshop that we did on Tuesday kind of talked about from the needs part of what it means to have that developmental disability. So we don't want to make any assumptions about your child or the person that you're thinking about. Certainly there are people with DD that go on and take college classes, and we know people that are getting supports from the DD service system that are in college. I know we all know one very close to our heart that will be getting her bachelor's degree, and yet because of her developmental needs for, you know, around income and around medical and around other things, is found eligible. So, you know, you might want to hang on and see if there's more information that might pertain to your child.
Okay, and just to be clear, that I think because we got another sort of follow-up of the question of you know, applying for these services later. I think everything in this webinar is applicable to that, even if a lot of what we talk about has the focus of a child who's turning 18, you know, 17, turning 18, and coming from that perspective. But a lot of these same processes are going to apply to somebody who's older. Is that fair to say?
As far as eligibility, I would say each case, the wonderful thing about applying for these services is that this is an application process that is personal and individualized. So while the process is the same for everyone, each application is taken individually. It's not put through a computer. As I think I've said in another workshop, it's a person reading these applications. And so again, it would be whether the individual is 40 or 50 and just, you know, deciding to apply for services, or whether it's 17 or 18. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. And we have quite a few questions coming in, which is great, folks. We love your questions. I think we could take one more and then maybe move on and see if we can answer some of these as we go. But one individual asks if DD services replace home-based services when the child reaches age 18.
Anybody want to touch on that? It could.
It could. Crystal, you want to address that one?
Yeah.
So if they are found eligible for DD services, it can replace those depending on what you choose for services that you want to get based on your funding level that you receive, which we will talk more in depth about the different funding levels and the different options that you have to pick from for services as we get further along. So we will touch that, but yes, you can replace your home base based on the kind of services and the funding that you have that you want to do.
And that's what we want you to be thinking about for anyone really right now who's using PASS systems or HBTS. That's how my son's 35, but that's how it all started. That was the whole kind of before he got to that age of 18, you know, to really look at their life. What do they need? Do they need supports in a home-based setting? So but again, everything's about eligibility. So just because you have those things in place now doesn't automatically mean that you would get this in a different service system. As Crystal says, as Annie's been talking about, it's so individualized, but yeah, that's what you want to be thinking that way.
All right, great questions, folks. Definitely keep submitting those questions, and we are going to pause periodically throughout. If we haven't answered your question yet, don't worry, we will get to it. But for now, I want to turn it back over to Sharon.
Thank you, Mark. So these are some of the services that you may request through the developmental disabilities. The first is case management, which is an assignment of a social caseworker who can help you navigate those systems and supports. Employment support, such as finding a job or keeping a job, job coaching and job development. Integrated day supports. It's not, I don't want you to think about a traditional 9 to 3 kind of adult daycare setting. It's more community-based and it's very individualized. So if the person has a small part-time job and they need staff from 4 to 7 in order for them to participate in that job, then that's how they'll utilize their staff hours. Home modifications would be any kind of updates that you need to make to your home to make it more accessible, whether that's wider doorways, a ramp, or a lift system. And finally, community supports, which is developing connections in your community's recreational activities and social gatherings. So I think this might clear up a little bit of the conversation questions that we just had. According to Rhode Island state law, the definition of a developmental disability means a person with a severe chronic condition and they meet the following criteria. They have a mental or physical impairment or combination of those impairments. It manifested before age 22 and it's likely to continue indefinitely. It's important to note that not all disabilities that occurred before 22 are considered developmental disability. Here, mental impairment relates to someone with a cognitive deficiency or an intellectual disability. But that doesn't, you don't have to have an intellectual disability in order to have a developmental disability. And on the flip side, just because you might access a wheelchair because you have a physical impairment, that also does not mean you automatically qualify as a developmental disability with these services. For today's workshop, we're going to be discussing the services through the DD door. But if you have a loved one who has serious mental illness, you can also apply for BHDDH, but that's through the behavioral health side, and that's a different application and different criteria. Today's workshop we're talking about is developmental disabilities. So besides meeting the definition, an individual must also have substantial functional limitations in at least 3 or more of these major life activity areas. They are substantially performing below their typical peers, and they need to qualify, like I said, in at least three of these areas. When we talk about personal care, they're talking about the person needs either a physical assistance or frequent supervision or extensive modeling for their self-care, such as bathing, eating, personal hygiene, or dressing. Around communication, it refers to a person's not only expressive language, but their receptive language. So do they need somebody to help interpret for them because they lack the capacity to comprehend the questions? Do they have somebody who speaks on their behalf because they're nonverbal? Or do they utilize assistive technology or alternative communication devices in order to make their needs well known? Mobility talks about the ongoing physical assistance of somebody else to move from place to place, or specialized equipment that helps them become more independent, such as a lift system or other kinds of devices in the home. Around learning, they want to look at a person who is performing 2 standard deviations below the mean on a comprehensive intelligence test. So for example, it could be a 10th grader that's only reading at a 2nd grade level. That's a big gap in the amount of comprehension. It also demonstrates somebody who has difficulty transferring skills. So they might be able to do really well in a classroom setting because it's very routine, but they can't transfer those skills out in the community. Around self-direction, this is the person's ability to use good judgment. So how do they make their decisions? How do they take care of their finances? How do they protect themselves and their belongings? Do they maintain social relationships? And how do they problem solve day-to-day situations? Capacity for independent living. They want to know about the level of support the individual needs in order to manage their healthcare needs, such as setting up their medications. How do they access the community? Like, how do they get to a grocery store or to a bank? How do they do with their household chores around the house? And how do they maintain their personal safety? Again, they would need to have either ongoing or frequent supervision in this area. And finally, economic self-sufficiency is the person's ability to maintain employment. Do they need extensive job training? Do they need, what kind of accommodations on the job do they need? Is it a checklist? Is it a job coach? Is it somebody standing there helping them step by step? Or is it, do they need somebody to check in? And do they have appropriate work break room conversation? So it's not only maintaining a job, but keeping a job. Really what this boils down to is these, again, we're going to sound like a broken record today, but they're services and supports that are very individualized, very person-centered, and are likely to last lifelong. As Crystal mentioned earlier, the eligibility process, the packet contains the completed application, all of the school's evaluations and the medical records, and they might also need a personal interview. That would happen in a scenario where the documentation didn't paint an accurate picture, or the eligibility board felt like they needed a little more information. I'm going to pause again to say, what Deb had said earlier about the importance of documentation and the family's participation in that process. We've had families that have said to us, the school did the application and now he got denied. But when they followed the appeals process, what happened was the kiddo had great academic skills. What he lacked was he couldn't make eye contact, or he needed comprehension clarification. So it became very clear to eligibility that it was more than just testing that the school had sent. So again, I don't want to, like Deb said before, this is one of the longest, maybe most intense steps, but once you've got all your documentation together, as you go through each process, and if you see the array of services that are available, you'll have everything in one place.
Sharon, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Do you think when we talk about, that was a great example, that it's really important for parents, when they can, for the most part, to be the one to really submit that application and based on what we've seen where applications may have been incomplete.
Yes.
Because when school, there might be more to that child's story than just school. That's a really important message for families to understand. What happens for every child, disability or not, is they leave school but the functioning pieces, that data is really important. Sometimes, you know, certainly the report card is not going to be the most important piece of paper when you're trying to access or you need to access adult services. So I don't know, just it sounds like that maybe that might be something you'd consider, that parents should do it themselves for the most part.
Yep.
Annie?
And we have peer professionals at RIPIN that can help parents with that application process as well. Sometimes we just need to dig a little deeper and say, you know what, yeah, he can get dressed. But when we dig, like I said, a little bit deeper, it's like, oh, he got dressed because I told him 3 times to get dressed and I had his clothes laid out and I did X, Y, Z. So, you know, how then we look up to see what kind of prompting and support that individual actually needed in order to make that task. It's not could they do the task, it's would they do the task.
I'd like to acknowledge too that sometimes, so what we're not saying is that we don't think teachers are being helpful.
Yes.
I think what I'd like to say is that a lot of times teachers are really good at getting the ball rolling. So we want to make sure we're giving the teachers a nod. And yet at the same time, sometimes there might be things way back. We talk about recent evaluations and diagnoses, but sometimes there might be that one diagnosis that was made a long time ago, has been assimilated into a child's life, accommodations have been made, and maybe that professional doesn't know about it, so that it's just because they didn't have knowledge of it. So really, it's this piece we should emphasize, that this is about the collaboration between the school professionals and the families. And that's where you get the richest data and the most comprehensive picture of a young person. Okay.
So once the eligibility has made their determination, if the student or the individual was found eligible, they will receive a written notice from BHDDH. They will be assigned onto the state transition coordinator's caseload, and Crystal's going to talk about that in just a few minutes. They get connected to a social caseworker at DD when they're age 20 or 1 year prior to them exiting school. The CIS-A meeting is scheduled, and that's going to be a more intensive interview that's going to determine their funding tier. And then families and the social worker will begin to explore what kind of options are out there for families. This is, again, just a preview of the other steps that we're going to be talking about. If the student is not found eligible, it will list the reason why. Perhaps they only qualified in 2, not 3 of those life area functions, and we might need to explore some older data. And then it also has the appeal rights in there. So families don't have to take a one and done decision. They can challenge the decision from DD. It could be that there's just not enough documentation to find the student eligible. And if there was anything missing in the packet, DD will also send a letter to the family telling them what's missing. And families have 60 days to submit that application, not the application, the missing documentation. And if they don't reach it in that timeline, the case will reopen once they do receive it, and then it moves forward to eligibility. So I know we just did a lot of big chunk of information again, Mark, and I'm thinking that we probably have some more questions to stop and answer.
We sure do, Sharon.
Okay.
One question, isn't a recent neuropsych eval one of the best documentations that you can provide, even more so than a school eval?
So a neuropsych is good information, especially if it's recent, because it speaks to the diagnosis. But what the school records bring in is how is that diagnosis impacting that student? So they could have an autism diagnosis, but we all know that autism presents itself in many, many different ways. So how is that diagnosis being impacted with the services that the school's providing?
Okay. I am a high school special ed teacher. How can I assist a parent with this process? Is there anything I should be doing to prepare my students for this process when transitioning out of high school?
Again, we thank you. We love to partner with teachers and our families together because that we know has the best outcome for students. Talking to your families, connecting them to the resources that are out there. We have, like I said, peer professionals that walk the walk and talk the talk. So sometimes this process is very, very scary for some families, and it's too big of a chunk to take. Sometimes they need baby steps. Anybody else want to add?
I'll add, I think you're their most trusted allies. So they know you, they trust you. So if you can guide them, again, I think I'm going to repeat myself, the richness of the evaluative data and reports that you can help them compile, making sure in general, I'm sure you all do, that evaluations are on time and recent and accurate. You know, sometimes even we do encourage families to really take that evaluation that was recent and say, does this really reflect them right now? And not to question because to be difficult, but to say, hey, you know what? I love that he performed so well on the day you evaluated him, but do you think that that's the most accurate representation of him? That personally happened for me. And again, my son at the time, he loved his teacher. He did everything he asked him to do. So it wasn't that I didn't appreciate the positive view, but I didn't feel it was a realistic picture of him. And I asked him to go back and really look at his wording, not because I was trying to make a case for a good, you know, decision on an application further down the road, but to really make sure. So if you feel that you and your parents have a good relationship and can talk those things out, I think it's okay to ask those parents, how do you feel about those evaluations after like they've just read 3 or 4 of them in a 1 hour period? That's just a quick tip for me.
I want to reiterate what these ladies have already said is we do love partnering with our special education teachers. They are such an important piece of the big picture. The fact that you're here, number one, and you're going to have this available to go back and look at it again, starting to think about the end, not the end, because this is really the beginning for students once they leave high school, but really understanding the components. This is not easy stuff. I mean, so the fact that you start to understand what new levels of eligibility are going to need in order for people to get the services they need is going to be helpful for you to understand. The second piece is remembering that school is one piece of an individual's life. And so that anything that you can do around person-centered planning, those tools that are out there to do those deeper dives when kids get maybe into those later grades, 11th, 10th, 11th grade, so that you're looking at the whole child and not just the child that shows up at school, like Annie's son, who, you know, was, and still is, this great kid who always followed the rules, but there is these other pieces of needs that he has there. So again, always be mindful. What you do is really, really important, but just like for the rest of us, it's one piece of a big picture. So how can you be more inclusive and thinking about bringing other people to the table when you can via the IEP process, person-centered planning, paths, those kind of activities that can talk the bigger picture, and really to help create that meaningful life.
Okay, great. Next question. My son has qualified and turned 21 in April. He will continue in school until 22. I have explored some agencies and understand the concept of self-directed supports, but as of now, I cannot visualize where we will be next year. What else should I be doing at this point in time with a year to go to adult services?
Can I just say, we're going to touch on self-direction a little bit later in this particular, so, I would definitely like to being in that conversation a little bit, since I do self-direct. But hold on for a minute. Because we're going to talk a little bit more about that, if you're okay with waiting. And we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on that.
Very good. These two questions are pretty related, I think. One says, I'm a case manager who works with transgender youth. Several of my clients are autistic and need services, but parents are not involved and these youth are homeless. Could I ask for peer support in helping these clients fill out applications? And then I think the other related question is, who at RIPIN does somebody contact to help with applying or with issues around applying?
So I'll tackle that one, or those two. So if parents are involved, I guess if youth are under 18 and there's no parents involved, I'm wondering, I would have to say whoever has decision-making rights for those youth would be the people involved. And I know that could be varied in your cases that you're thinking about. So as a teacher, if you're speaking as a teacher or a caseworker, applications can be filled out for a youth under 18 with the support of that guardian decision maker. Once a child or youth is over 18, they can fill it out themselves with an adult or supports staff's support. That it actually comes as them as their own guardian. Let's see, how would you contact RIPIN or get that support? We have a call center, which is the best place to start for RIPIN. So that is information that we will give you at the end. We have a main number, and then that call center conducts an intake with the basic information for the caller, and then that would be funneled to our program to support directly. Did I miss anything, ladies?
The only other, every school district has its homeless liaison. I don't know what their involvement would be with that student. Certainly that child is, if that child's considered homeless and they've got an IEP, and I think of all the other decision-making, again, like Annie said, if they're under 18, there's gotta be some other supports within the district, first of all, to say who's writing this. I mean, the child would need an IEP. I mean, that's kind of that's a big part of this, but do they have any supports in place?
Well, that question or two added that it's often DCYF. But sometimes they are 18 and over. I think a lot of times they're 18 and over, this person's saying, and then they're on their own filling them out with the youth. And so, yeah, Sharon, you want to talk about how we might be able to support? Again, I think Annie said it, they can call RIPIN. We are working to help people follow, go through that process.
Yep, I think Crystal had mentioned earlier that children that are in DCYF can apply as 2 years before leaving services. So if they, again, call our main number, they can be connected with our program, and we can support the individual that's 18 through the process.
And they're also they should be working with DCYF with an educational advocate, and that's a DCYF identified educational advocate if there is no parent involved. So again, there are these other pieces that can be there for this youth in addition to RIPIN. But if a young person under the age of 18 contacted us, we would be asking these same questions. Who is the educational advocate that you're working with through DCYF? All those other kind of legal pieces around decision making.
And usually I will say if DCYF is involved and the student is under 18, they're usually the ones that are doing the application and submitting it. From meetings that we've gone to, they're usually going to assist the youth with that process, but we could help as well.
Okay, let's do one more question and then try to move on, and we'll come back to a lot of these questions. They're really great questions, folks. Thank you for sending them in. For a 19-year-old, how far back should you go, and what types of school records are most important when they don't have an IEP and student recent writing exam? When they don't have an IEP, report cards, written teacher evaluations, and student recent writing samples. I guess the question is what should you prioritize? What are the most important records, and how far back should you go?
Can I tackle that one? Because that one could be a whole session in itself, and we might want to encourage mom to contact RIPIN to explore that further. But if you've got a 19-year-old right now that hasn't been diagnosed with identified as a child with a disability, that's your first step. Okay, so that piece needs to happen, that through evaluation processes, and RIPIN can help support you around those next steps. But the first step is identifying whether there's disability, not just diagnosis, but a disability that's impacting their education. If they are still in school at age 19, they do not have an IEP, the next question becomes disability. And I would say this would probably be one of those questions to let's take offline, contact our call center, let them do some intake with you. They will then refer you over to our program, and we can go a little bit deeper and see if we can help you, navigate that. Anybody? Is that fair? Yeah. Okay.
All right, very good. I'm going to turn it back over to Crystal now. But folks, as you think of more questions, feel free to send them in. But go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you, Mark. So as Sharon had mentioned before the break, if the child that has applied for services is under age 20, then a state transition coordinator is going to be assigned to them. And the state transition coordinator carries a caseload, and they can answer some specific questions, and they also help provide information. Also, the DD state transition coordinator will inform the school if RIPIN staff person will be attending the meeting. So the RIPIN staff, if they're attending the meeting, they're going to contact the district's identified contact person, provide their name and contact information, confirm the date, the meeting time, and the location of the meeting, and explain what RIPIN's role will be at the meeting. So next, we're going to kind of dive a little deeper into the supports intensity scale that we had mentioned before, or the SIS-A. So the SIS is a national assessment tool that is used in over 14 states and countries. It measures the individual's supports needs and personal, work, and social activities in order to identify and describe the types of intensity of supports an individual requires. The SIS was designed to be part of a person-centered planning process that will help all individuals identify their unique preferences, skills, and life goals. The SIS-A is a tool to access someone's level of support services needed to then determine a tier level that will relate to their funding that they can receive for adult services. So when we go and talk about the SIS process, basically the SIS is administered for the youth approximately 12 to 18 months before their 21st birthday, unless it's requested sooner. The respondents that are involved with the interview must have known the person being assessed for at least 3 months and have had recent opportunities to observe the person's function in one or more environments for substantial periods of time. Questions in the interview will be extremely personal at times, and it can be difficult. And answers need to be thought out carefully and may include the support necessary to live independently. But remember, if it becomes too difficult, that you can always ask for a break. And individuals are required to be present at the beginning of the interview, but they do not have to stay for the whole time if they're uncomfortable. It can also be helpful to have someone with you who has either been through the process or at least just have that additional person that has history with the participant that's applying. The assessment is done through an interview with the consumer and all those that know that person well. I like to tell families that you want to have people in the room that know your child the best, but can also be objective, because sometimes parents do things without thinking and it becomes second nature. And so you don't remember that you're actually doing those things for your child. So as a parent or guardian, as we mentioned, this process can be very difficult. And up till now, for the most part, you have provided all your child's basic needs. And for the SIS, it's going to measure the supports that would need to be available for the person to engage in each task successfully as someone else their own age. Supports are in place within these environments that have a level of oversight. With that oversight, what would it look like? So these are some of the things that we want you to start thinking about. What is it that an individual actually able to do on their own? The assist is going to rank each activity according to frequency. It's going to go from none or at least once a month. And then it's going to also talk about amount, none or less than 30 minutes. And then the type of support, like for example, monitoring or verbal gesturing. So I like to tell people to kind of think back to that actual DD application when you applied in section 2, where you had to really dig deep about if your child needed none, no assistance at all, they were independent with the task, or do they need prompting? Do they need verbal reminders or cues or visuals? Or do they need direct assistance with activities, physical assistance, or total support or hand over hand? So some examples or things to think about when you're going through this process is basically, if someone were to ask whether your individual is able to dress on their own, your first response might be yes. But would the individual actually get dressed on their own if someone wasn't prompting them? What would they actually need to get dressed on their own? Do they need those visuals? Do they need prompting? Or do they need some physical support? So you really want to dig deeper. Another example would be, does an individual manage money and personal finances independently? If not, what kind of supports would it take for them to be able to do that? Can an individual participate in leisure activities in the community setting? If not, what would this look like? I also like to remind people to kind of think about if it was your child's first day and they didn't have their current supports in place, their family, their school, their friends, and they were independent, how would they do the things that the interviewer is asking them? So we're going to take another break and see if there's any other questions, since that was a lot of information.
Can I just add to everything that Crystal just said? The part about it being challenging is that this makes it very different from the IEP process. So we're really looking so much deeper into the functioning of an individual. And a lot of the things that can happen in that is we look at our child as a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, and as parents, we're looking at what are other 20-year-olds, what are other 18-year-olds, so that can be a little bit challenging. I think what I want, because this process is extremely important, the SIS, and it may have some challenges associated with it. The important part is that it's so much needed to actually figure out, it's not just about dollars, but to really figure out what that person needs. It was, for me, having a 35-year-old, it's been a few years, but when somebody asked me that question that Crystal asked, so can he get dressed on his own? Of course he can get dressed on his own. He's been getting dressed on his own since he could, whatever. But would he get dressed on his own is a different question. And that I have fortunately had a very good interviewer that asked that question, which became very emotional. But I've learned to live with thinking about those questions. The last thing, and then I'll just promise to shut up because I never stop talking, is the idea that this is not the end. Finishing school, and this is for all of our kids, is only the beginning. That we grow, we learn new skills. We're still learning new skills. And I've seen more since my son has left high school than that during that time, those last few years of high school. So I want this to also be a hopeful time. Sorry.
That's okay.
That's my
I'm gonna interrupt you before Mark throws some more questions. One tip, really quick, a tip that I would love to share because it helped me. I found during our SIS, it's very rapid moving, and not because anyone was trying to rush me through it, but the questions are kind of standard, like as far as a structure. And I had a really good administrator of that scale, and she did encourage me to keep telling her to slow down if I needed it, to stop, re-ask the question, please. It's okay to stop and let it take a slower pace. And again, like Deb said, having someone with you who is able to kind of go, are you sure? Like someone on who knows your child well. It's really important to have someone who might challenge you on some of those, whether it's, that they do it with less support or whether they really do need more support. That's it. You can go ahead.
You hit it. You hit it. This was an important piece, which is where my brain forgot. Having other people more than a teacher. As we said earlier, education is important. And for those teachers that are listening, please don't think we're discarding you, because we're not. But a person is more than just that. And if you don't have others, I bring people to Matt Sis now that will pinch me under the table, will challenge me. I want them there. I want them to be able to speak about him. I can only speak about him as his mother. And that's not fair to him, because he's way more than my son. So be cautious of just having a sis with one person. Crystal said it. Somebody that's known him more for 3 months, 3 years, I don't know. It seems to me they should need a lot of time, but they can speak to other pieces that are about that person. They're more than, again, just what's in that IEP. Sorry.
So one question we have is, who do I contact if my daughter is denied services to appeal that decision? We are waiting on an answer right now. So who do they contact if they need to appeal?
So they received the denial letter and have already started the process of the appeals process?
It sounds like they're waiting to hear at this point, but they're, in the event that they are denied, I think they're asking, in that case, then what is the next step?
So there will be some instructions on how to begin the appeal process with a denial letter. But then they can reach out again to our call center. They'll do an intake, and maybe we just didn't submit enough information, for them to make a good decision.
Okay, very good. We are getting close to the end, so I just want to let, I think next up is Sharon, actually. So Sharon, if you want to take us away, and we will try to hit more questions before we close out.
All right. I believe we're moving on to step 5, which is the DHS waiver application. Approximately 3 months prior to you starting DD services, families will need to complete this waiver in order to have Medicaid sort of turn on the services for BHDDH to pay. It's important to note that you didn't need Medicaid to be found eligible for services, but to access the services, you do need to have the Medicaid in place. So you can do that by applying through Social Security. And if they are found eligible for the supplemental security income, or the SSI, that comes with the Medicaid, they can also apply for if they meet certain income requirements. All individuals who access the BHDDH services, again, will need to fill out this application. Just because you have an anchor card in your pocket doesn't mean that you automatically are all set for service. This is an additional step. And if you need help filling out that application, you've got your social caseworker at BHDDH. Usually by this point, they've been assigned. Or again, we have peer professionals here at RIPIN that can help you with that process as well. So your social caseworker is going to become your point person moving forward in this transition and navigating of adult services. They assist in service planning and provisions. They will discuss goals and your concerns as a family. They'll identify community supports and access to resources. They will also talk about the different options that are available. And I think Crystal's going to be talking about that in just a few more minutes. And they also assist in crisis management. So think of them as your bridge. We like to use them as they know what's in your community. They know that based on your child's individual needs, what kind of supports and services or programs might be out there that would be a good match for them. And now I'm going to send it over to Crystal, and she is going to review the service tier package.
There, I help if I unmuted. Sorry about that. So once your initial paperwork and the CISA is completed and submitted, you should receive a letter with your SIS service tier package. So with that letter, it's also going to include a resource allocation, which is going to show up to 3 months to purchase day integrated and supported employment program and or community-based support services. You're also going to get a certified DDO service provider list, a blank individual support plan or ISP, but you want to keep in mind that this isn't an actual authorization for funding. This is going to be determined after eligibility for Medicaid to fund services and your authorization of the interim ISP. So basically, your final funding authorization takes place after that ISP is submitted and approved. So next, we're going to talk about some of your options. So along with the paperwork, as I mentioned, you're going to receive a list of those service providers. This list can also be found on bhdh.rhodeisland.gov's website as well. And this list is for you to choose from to providing the services and supports that your child needs. It's important that you shop around and interview different agencies to determine which one best meets your needs. It's important for you to know that you have choices in how to direct your funding. Make sure you ask your DDD social worker for information about self-direction. If you choose self-direction, you will need to pick a fiscal intermediary or an FI, which refers to an entity or a private company that has a contract with Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services or CMS. An individual decides how they want to allocate their support dollars through the use of the FI. I'll explain this a little more in a later slide. But I like to also say that with these services now, they're a lot more personalized, as Sharon had mentioned before, and you can really allocate your services. Individuals now have more choice and have options, like you can get services from an employment agency, community supports from an agency, and do self-direct. You can do a combination of services or just do one. Really, it's up to the individual and your funding level for what you want. So next, we're going to talk about traditional agency-based supports. So with a traditional agency-based support, the person and their family and your trusted allies, you'll choose your provider agency. That agency will hire and train employees. They'll also provide services based on the person's needs and their funding levels. The individual or the person has many choices and opportunities, but the services may not always be individualized. That's the only downside sometimes with only doing traditional based. Another option, as we mentioned, was self-directed supports. This allows adults with developmental disabilities, along with their families and trusted allies, to design their own supports and direct how their assigned support dollars are spent through the use of a fiscal intermediary. Using the self-directed supports, people can create the support system they want by choosing caregivers, goods, and services that fit their needs and personality. Compared to the traditional agency-based services, self-directed model allows for more flexibility, individualization, and direct control, and allows more money to go towards direct support. However, it also involves more responsibility for the individual or their family. You can find more information specifically about the self-directed program by going to medicaid.gov. And also we do have a self-directed webinar on our RIPIN website. But I did want to talk a little more about the fiscal intermediary that you would need for this process. The fiscal intermediary will be responsible to process all appropriate federal state forms to enroll the person as a household employer. They're also going to screen all potential employees, for instance, the BCI, the I-9s, and application. They'll process payroll, pay vendors, obtain workers' compensation, provide periodic financial reports to the person, and process quarterly and year-end taxes and financial data.
Can I add to that, Crystal, before you go forward? So I'm going back to that question earlier, and this woman that's thinking a year and, kind of thinking not to go into a super deep dive, because we do have a workshop that you can watch online about this. But where you are right now is you want to start thinking about what an average day looks like and what it'll start looking like without a school day in there, and start mapping out. You and I, we all get up at a certain time of the day. We have certain routines during the day, and just start to think about how you might want to start filling that time. Don't be thinking about, whether self-direction is the way to go or not yet, but really start thinking about, what is that individual, not only what they want, but all the other supports that might be in place or for that family. For some individuals, like Crystal said, there might be a little of both going on. There's a lot to consider. Self-direction can work very well for individuals who are ready to say, this is what I want. This is how I want my day to go. And I want to hire my staff. It can work in a lot of different ways, but it's also, there's work involved. But again, and we would encourage you to kind of look at that, go to our website, check that out a little bit more, and then feel free to call us back after you've had that kind of taken a little bit deeper dive into that. I do not know what happened to this slide.
So next, we're going to talk about the individual support plan, or the ISP. Once your letter has been received confirming your eligibility and your funding levels, paperwork needs to be completed in developing your child's individual support plan. This will be developed by your DD agency support coordinator if you're using a traditional agency, or by a plan writer if you're using self-directed supports. And as of March 1st, 2013, ISPs are now all required to include employment goals and/or integrated community activities and objectives. Remember, the overall goal is to consider and work towards competitive employment and away from sheltered workshops. Think least restricted environment for employment. So in order to renew your funding, an ISP will need to be completed and submitted on an annual basis, no later than 45 days prior to your anniversary date. I think we're going to take another break and see if there's any other questions.
So one person asks if there's someone that they can speak with that can help, that has expertise in applications for older adults, whether they're over 65 or under 65. Older adults who are applying for these services.
I think regardless of age, we would just say the same thing, that you can call the call center and we can take the intake information, and then they'll pass it along to the peer support coordinators to assist the family in doing the application.
And again, the same criteria is the same. Is this someone that has had a lifelong developmental disability since birth or before the age of 22? I think it's important that we want to make sure that you're going in the right system, that this is the place. There's got to be a lot of, I would say, medical diagnosis and a lot of paperwork in order to access that system at that point. And it's possible. There may be individuals out there that
I know for somebody older that I assisted, the medical piece is very important, as Deb just said, but also I think what was helpful, because obviously they had been out of school for a long time, they were in their 60s. So basically it was definitely showing that the diagnosis happened before 22. That was the biggest thing to make sure we got. And then the other piece was they were actually going to like a day program type of thing for elderly. So we got some documentation from there to kind of say what that place was doing for them, what kind of services or supports they were providing. So anything that you can think of, even if the person's, like we had mentioned before, getting OT or PT or any of those other kind of services, if they can document stuff as well, that will also help too to go into the application, since you're going to kind of be missing a lot of that school piece.
Fantastic.
My child has Katie Beckett, not Social Security. Does she need to apply for Social Security?
So I think to keep in mind for Katie Beckett, it's going to end at age 19. So reason why, again, like Sharon had mentioned, we mentioned to apply for SSI is because it comes with Medicaid. So, and once an individual turns 18, when you apply for SSI, it's only based on their own income now. And that comes with the Medicaid. So for the Katie Beckett, it's going to end at 19, so that won't roll over for adult services anyway. So you would still need to then apply for Medicaid after. So it'd be your choice if you want to do the route of applying for SSI first, and if they're eligible with that, getting the Medicaid, or just straight applying for Medicaid and seeing based on funding of eligibility, if they meet the income, then they could get it that way.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this one. I believe that we've been told that if you have Katie Beckett and you get, is it at 18 and I can't remember the date, so help me, where you would automatically receive paperwork in order to access Medicaid, like come in that different door as an adult? Is that
I
what
think
Sarah told us?
at 17 and a half, they get a letter in the mail that says
Right.
your Katie Beckett's ending at age 19 and you'll need to apply for
Okay.
Medicaid or SSI. We have a RIPIN consultant in the Katie Beckett unit, and if you call our call center, we can connect you with their information as well.
Perfect, thank you.
And question, the ISP and self-support plans kind of sound similar to parts of PASS. Is the difference just the age ranges and different goals?
So for the individual support plan, it's really, it might be similar. I'm not too familiar with the PASS plans, but for the individual support plans, you're really going to be talking about the individual's whole life. And not just 1 year, but what do they want in life? What do they want to do? And again, you do have to include some employment and community, integrated community supports and goals, but you really want to just think about like person-centered, what are the things that this individual wants to do as an adult, and what kind of things do they need to get there? And then what are the kind of services that can help them do that? And even outside of DD, what else out there can help them reach those goals? So it's kind of supposed to discuss their whole life and not just right now or 1 year from now.
Okay, then we're going to turn it over to Sharon to bring us home.
Okay. I wait all through the slides to get to this one with the thumbs up. So once DD approves your individualized service plan, and you have the Medicaid waiver in place and the services are turned on, the authorization goes through and they are submitted in quarterly increments. So every quarter you get to, get a certain allotment of money. And again, just a reminder that every year your plan has to be resubmitted, and it's 45 days before your anniversary date that you would submit that plan along. Again, go back to the couple of slides ago where we said our social caseworker is our point person. They're the person along with your plan writer that's going to help get you where you need to be. Okay. So we've discussed a lot of information today, and I know that whether you're transitioning out of high school or whether you're transitioning at age 50, that these are not easy questions or these can be challenging times, but it's also an opportunity to create some new pathways for yourself, as well as making informed decisions that maybe we hope that you walked away here with some more questions that were generated by the information that you received today. And even if you just take a little bit of the understanding, we hope that that helps you be more confident in your navigating as you begin this process of adult services. And these are just the resources that we used in developing not only today's workshop, but also on Tuesday when we introduced a lot of the state agencies that are available for students transitioning out of high school. We found these to be very helpful for general information, and we used their expertise to help bring this information to you. And Mark, that is all we have for today. So if there are more questions, we are ready.
Can I just going back to resources? I've been reminded by our associates over at the Department of Developmental Disabilities to remind everyone to visit the BHGDH website. They have done a lot of work in that area. This top resource right here it's got a lot of good information. It's got the application process. It answers a lot of questions, FAQs. Again, please feel free to reach out to them also with questions.
Okay, well, this was a lot of great information. We did go a little long, so I want to thank everybody who stuck with us. And I want to thank Crystal and Sharon and Deb for giving us a lot of great, helpful information today. And yes, someone's asking right now, actually, will the presentation be emailed? So you will receive an email, if you haven't already, that has a link to a recording of this webinar, a link to a page to download not only the slides, all the slides that you saw today, but also all of the handouts that we normally give out in person when we do this webinar, and many more links to resources like you just saw on that last slide. And finally, you can always call us, call RIPIN at 401-270-0101. We have peer professionals like the lovely ladies you heard from today who help folks navigate these processes every day. They've gone through it, a lot of them themselves, and they have that experience, and it's what we're here to do. So feel free to reach out. But again, thanks everybody for joining us, and I want to bid you all a good afternoon and stay safe. Take it easy.